The Silver Pines subdivision glistened beneath a bright summer sky, each house a carefully maintained specimen of suburban charm. Row upon row of manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and identical lampposts lined the streets. A stately wooden sign by the entrance declared the community's name, flanked by flower beds. For many, this picturesque environment offered security and pride. Yet it also meant a certain rigidity, owing to the Silver Pines Homeowners Association, HOA, that governed daily life. The HOA enforced extensive guidelines on house color, fence height, even permissible front yard decor. Noncompliance led to fines. Residents had grown used to abiding by the strict structure. Some appreciated the enforced neatness. Others quietly disliked it, but complied anyway. A few members on the HOA board were known for leniency, but overshadowing them was Brenda Farnett, commonly addressed as Karen. No one in Silver Pines recalled the exact moment Brenda began being called Karen, but the nickname stuck after repeated episodes of her stepping beyond standard rule enforcement. She had no official board position, yet she treated the bylaw binder like a personal decree. She patrolled the neighborhood, snapping phone pictures of minor infractions, pestering the board to take action. Some found her vigilant approach helpful in maintaining order. Many more found it abrasive and meddling. One house near the center of Silver Pines belonged to the Lancaster family, known for their friendly vibe and an open-door policy. Their teenage son, Elliot, used a wheelchair due to a spinal injury from a car accident years ago. Elliot also had a small electric mobility scooter, an upright model with a seat, designed for those who struggled with stamina. He'd ride it around the neighborhood, enjoying independence despite his disability. This innocuous device would soon become the focus of Karen's next crusade, culminating in a test of the entire community's moral fabric. Little did Elliot suspect how far Karen would go to preserve her sense of strict compliance. And little did Karen realize that her attempt to sabotage one teen's mobility would trigger a wave of neighborly support culminating in a forward-thinking solution that rendered her meddling moot. Elliot's e-scooter gave him freedom. He could zip to the local park, meet friends at the corner cafe, or run short errands. Its battery typically lasted the day, but occasionally he found himself at the clubhouse or near a community gazebo with a drained battery. If needed, he'd plug the scooter's charger into one of the communal outdoor outlets, like those near the tennis courts or the small picnic area, just for a quick top-up. The battery sipped modest power, taking maybe 20 to 30 minutes to get enough juice for the ride home. Most neighbors who saw Elliot charging his scooter were understanding. He was a good kid, polite and responsible, hardly draining the HOA's budget by plugging in for a brief period. The board had never specifically addressed e-vehicle charging in the common area, and no one had complained, until Karen stumbled upon Elliot one afternoon, quietly reading a book while his scooter recharged. Karen marched over, her expression tight. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. Elliot, startled, explained he was just topping up the battery for his mobility device. Karen huffed. "These outlets aren't for personal use. You're taking HOA-paid electricity. That's effectively theft." Elliot offered to donate a few dollars if needed, but Karen snapped that it wasn't about money, it was the principle. She threatened to raise the issue with the board if he continued stealing power. Elliot left as soon as the battery had enough charge to get home, rattled by Karen's confrontation. Later, he told his parents, who frowned but advised him not to worry. "She's known to blow small issues out of proportion," his mom assured. "The board likely won't side with her on something so minor." Elliot shrugged, uneasy. He disliked conflict, but also hated feeling singled out for needing a brief charge. If the cost was an issue, he was willing to pay. So far, though, no official rule forbade him from using the outlet. No big deal, he hoped. But Karen's annoyance only grew. She'd discovered a new infraction to crusade against, and that initial scolding was but a prelude to a deeper, more malicious tactic she would employ. When word of Karen's confrontation spread, neighbors expressed mild astonishment. Many saw Elliot's scooter as an extension of his mobility device. Sure, the HOA had rules about not powering personal vehicles from community electricity, but a small wheelchair or medical scooter was a special case. A few board members quietly told Elliot that he could keep charging as needed, though they had to remain neutral in any official stance until the next meeting. Meanwhile, Karen circulated an email to the board, labeling Elliot's usage as a slippery slope, claiming soon people might plug in golf carts or e-bikes for hours. She insisted the HOA must draft a bylaw banning personal device charging from communal outlets. Ms. Hamilton, the board president, hesitated to enact a broad ban that penalized disabled residents. Some neighbors pointed out how trivial the cost was. Elliot's brief charges might amount to pennies monthly. And morally, preventing a disabled teen from using a short charge seemed unthinkably heartless. In response, Ms. Hamilton scheduled an informal discussion at the next monthly board gathering, inviting Elliot's parents to share insight. Some older neighbors who'd grown fond of Elliot's polite manner braced for a fight. They suspected Karen would push hard for a ban. Elliot's father, Brian, decided to gather support, possibly pointing out that the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, might see such a ban as discriminatory. Although the HOA wasn't a public entity, the concept of fairness rang strongly among neighbors. Karen, picking up on these rumblings, grew more determined. She believed that letting the teen freeload electricity set a dangerous precedent. She boasted about times she'd successfully enforced rules, like banning inflatable pools from front yards. This was just the next stand. The fact that it impacted a disabled teen didn't deter her. In her mind, rules were rules. But among the community at large, sympathy for Elliot soared. People admired that he strove for independence despite mobility challenges. The question stood, would the board side with compassion or with the letter of Karen's dreaded bylaw expansions? Before the next board meeting, an ugly incident occurred. Elliot had parked his scooter by the community clubhouse while meeting a friend for a half hour. Low on battery, he plugged it into an outdoor outlet near a soda vending machine. 15 minutes later, he returned, expecting at least partial charge, but found the charger cable yanked from the outlet, the scooter still powerless. Confused, Elliot reconnected it, resumed waiting. But minutes later, Karen appeared, her face set in a triumphant sneer. "We do not allow personal charging here," she barked. "I unplugged it once. That's your warning. If you keep ignoring me, I'll escalate this." Elliot stammered that he had no official notice from the HOA. Karen retorted that she'd soon get one passed. For now, she forbade him from using the outlets. She threatened to confiscate the charger if he disobeyed. Shaken, Elliot rolled away, the battery still near empty. He made it home with difficulty, worried his scooter might die mid-route. That evening, Elliot's parents were livid hearing how Karen had forcibly unplugged his device. They vowed to bring this up at the upcoming board meeting, condemning Karen's harassment. Meanwhile, neighbors who heard the story rallied behind Elliot, outraged at Karen's callousness. The teen's father told a friend, "It's not about electricity cost. She's humiliating him for needing a small accommodation." Their frustration deepened. If Karen was bold enough to unplug the charger in broad daylight, what else might she do? In the background, Karen prepared her arguments for the board, framing Elliot's usage as a violation of communal resource policy. She boasted to a few like-minded neighbors that she'd teach that boy to obey rules and protect HOA property from freeloaders. The lines were drawn, compassion versus rigid enforcement, and it was only getting more heated. The next HOA board meeting took place in the large community hall, brimming with curious residents. Word had spread about the friction over Elliot's scooter. Ms. Hamilton opened the session, listing the agenda items. Then came the highlight, discussion of personal device charging in common areas. Karen, wearing a crisp blouse and holding a folder, eyed Elliot and his parents with a smug expression. Ms. Hamilton invited them to speak. Elliot's father, Brian, recounted how Karen had forcibly unplugged his son's mobility device multiple times, even though it used minimal electricity. He stressed that the act felt discriminatory, as Elliot's scooter was akin to a wheelchair, essential for his mobility. Mother Linda chipped in, referencing the small cost. "We're happy to pay a nominal fee if that's the issue, but punishing a disabled teen for a short charge is cruel." Karen then took the floor, reading from typed notes. She portrayed a slippery slope. "If we allow one person to use our outlets for free, tomorrow we might see a wave of e-bikes, electric cars, all tapping the HOA's electricity. That's unfair to paying residents. It's not about the boy personally, it's about principle." Mutters of disapproval echoed in the crowd. Some recognized Karen's fear-mongering as overblown. Ms. Hamilton tried to mediate. "We can't conflate a disabled teen's small device with large vehicles. We need a balanced approach. Another board member suggested a compromise, perhaps a dedicated medical device outlet for minimal usage, or a small monthly surcharge if the cost truly mattered. The crafters with personal knowledge of Elliot's situation argued that the cost was negligible, maybe a few cents per charge. No immediate resolution emerged. The board tabled the issue, promising to propose guidelines for e-scooters or similar mobility devices at the next meeting. Ms. Hamilton pleaded for civility, asking Karen not to unplug Elliot's charger again until the board reached a decision. Karen's face tightened. She gave a curt nod, not committing to anything. Elliot left feeling uneasy. His parents worried Karen would ignore the board's plea. Meanwhile, neighbors who witnessed the tension vowed to find a way to help Elliot continue living freely, unimpeded by Karen's hostility. Days after the contentious meeting, Elliot visited the community pool to meet a friend. Parking his scooter out front, he plugged it in at a corner outlet, heeding Ms. Hamilton's request that Karen not interfere until a formal policy was established. But as Elliot swam and relaxed, trouble brewed. When he returned to retrieve the scooter, he found it once more unplugged. This time, the entire charger lay on the ground, cord coiled in a neat swirl as though forcibly removed. The battery percentage remained low, not enough to get home. Elliot fumed, scanning the area. No sign of Karen, but the sabotage was obvious. He turned the key, the scooter beeped a low battery warning. Stranded, he called his father for help. A security camera outside the pool area might have captured the moment of unplugging, but the angle was uncertain. Furious, Elliot's father arrived, collecting the flustered teen and the uncharged scooter. Another humiliating episode. Enough was enough. They decided to confront the HOA again, demanding stronger measures to protect Elliot's right to a minimal charge. Ms. Hamilton sympathized, but lamented the board lacked direct proof that Karen did it. "We can't force compliance if we can't confirm who's unplugging him," she said regretfully. Incensed, Elliot's father turned to neighbors for possible creative solutions. If the communal outlets were policed by Karen, maybe they needed a different approach. A man named Sam, an eco-enthusiast, proposed a radical idea: portable solar panels. If Elliot's scooter had a small attachable solar kit, he wouldn't need any outlet. At first, the concept sounded far-fetched, but Sam insisted modern technology allowed for foldable solar panels that could trickle charge a small battery. Intrigued, the family asked for details. Freed from Karen's meddling, Elliot could roam without fear of an unplugged cable. Could that be the ultimate solution? Elliot's father, Brian, and Sam began researching portable solar kits for e-scooters. They discovered that while large electric vehicles needed massive panels, a low-power mobility scooter often needed only modest wattage to sustain top-ups during daytime. Some foldable or attachable solar arrays, combined with a small MPPT charger, could indeed feed the scooter's battery enough energy for typical usage. The cost wasn't negligible, maybe a few $100s for decent panels and a charge controller, but it was within reach if neighbors chipped in. The idea fired up the community's imagination. Freed from reliance on the communal outlets, Elliot could charge anywhere the sun shone. That would sidestep Karen's sabotage. The local code had no restriction on personal solar usage for mobility devices. Ms. Hamilton found it appealing from an eco-friendly angle. Even the crafters, who'd grown protective of Elliot, offered to donate to the solar fund. Linda from the craft circle quipped, "Karen can't unplug the sun." People chuckled, realizing the irony. The simplest resolution was to remove the outlet from the equation. Though the technology was a bit new, Sam felt confident it would work. He recommended a foldable panel that could drape over the scooter's seat or store in a rear basket. Alternatively, they could mount a small rigid panel on the scooter's roof if designed properly. Elliot, excited at the prospect of free, green power, was game to experiment. Karen, hearing whispers of a solar plan, rolled her eyes. She dismissed it as ridiculous and unsightly. But the momentum built swiftly. A small group tested prototypes, hooking them to a spare battery. Sure enough, in direct sunlight, they gleaned enough trickle charge to keep a small e-scooter going indefinitely, especially if Elliot plugged it in at home for a full overnight charge, using the solar only as a daytime booster. The synergy of neighborly support and modern technology promised a final blow to Karen's sabotage. They just needed to finalize the design, raise a bit more money, and present it to Elliot as a gift. As the solar project took shape, Sam and Linda started an informal crowdfunding campaign among neighbors. They posted on the Oakwood Glen forum, explaining the concept. Help Elliot ride free from sabotage. Let's equip his scooter with a solar charger. The response was enthusiastic. People donated $5, $10, even $50, praising the initiative as both kind-hearted and forward-thinking. Some residents recalled how the crafters overcame sabotage with a new pavilion. Now it was Elliot's turn to harness positivity from adversity. Within a week, Sam had enough funds to order a foldable solar kit with decent wattage, plus a specialized charge controller designed for the scooter's battery specs. Another neighbor who tinkered with electronics offered to handle the wiring. Elliot's father planned to mount a small bracket to secure the panel behind the seat, collapsible when not needed. Karen, of course, posted scornful remarks. Are we turning Oakwood Glen into a science experiment? That hideous contraption will stand out like an eyesore. Mark my words, the board won't allow random solar panels strapped to vehicles. Ms. Hamilton quickly clarified that personal vehicles, especially medical devices, could be modified as the owner wished, as long as it didn't violate safety or local codes. The board saw no reason to forbid a solar charger on a scooter. Karen's last argument about aesthetics rang hollow. No bylaw existed about a mobility device's color or attachments. Elliot followed these developments in awe. He'd never asked for such a grand solution. He just wanted to charge safely. Yet the generosity of neighbors offered him a future free of worry. If the solar kit worked, Karen could never unplug his cable again. The sun would become his unstoppable power source. That notion filled him with hope and a spark of defiance toward the woman who tried to curb his independence. One breezy Saturday morning, about 10 neighbors gathered in the Lancasters' driveway to help outfit Elliot's scooter with the new solar kit. Sam arrived with the large box containing foldable panels, a small charge controller, and cables. Another neighbor, Jared, who had mechanical know-how, carried custom brackets he'd fashioned from lightweight aluminum. Elliot, excited but a bit nervous, watched them lay out the components on a folding table. First, Sam connected the charge controller to the scooter's battery leads, verifying polarity with a multimeter. Next, Jared measured the scooter's rear trunk area and seat back, determining the best place to mount the bracket so the panels could fold behind the seat when not in use. They drilled carefully, ensuring no wires were damaged. Elliot's father lent a hand, holding screws and washers. The entire operation felt like a mini workshop. After an hour, the bracket was secure, and the folding solar array, about 2 feet wide by 3 feet tall when opened, attached with quick-release hinges. When folded, it barely extended beyond the seat's silhouette, compact and sleek. The group tested the wiring by rolling the scooter into sunlight. The mini display on the charge controller lit up, indicating power flow from the panels. Freed from the communal outlets, Elliot's scooter now harnessed direct sunshine. A small beep signaled the battery was charging. Applause broke out. Linda snapped photos, capturing Elliot's grin. He flicked the scooter's ignition on, verifying it was charging while switched off, yet still operational. Sam explained that bright midday sun would yield faster charging, but even partial sun offered a trickle. In practice, Elliot might still do full overnight charges at home for convenience, but on the go, the solar array would offset usage. No more needing to find a public outlet. No more risking Karen's sabotage. That afternoon, Elliot took the scooter for a test ride around the block, panels folded behind him. He returned beaming, the battery gauge steady. Everyone cheered. Karen's unplugging days had ended. Not long after Elliot's solar installation, he ventured to the clubhouse. This time, instead of rolling up to an outlet, he simply parked in a sunny patch. He flipped open the panel, letting it soak up rays while he went inside for a quick meeting. Karen emerged from the side exit, witnessing the contraption's glint in the sunlight. She frowned, approaching the scooter as if to find a plug to yank. But there was none. Elliot appeared just then, cheerfully greeting her. "No more cords, Miss Farnett," he said politely. "All solar now." He patted the panel's surface. Karen's face twisted in dismay. "This bizarre addition was approved?" she stammered. Elliot nodded. "My parents cleared it with the HOA. It's a personal modification, harming no one." He added that it was funded by neighbors who cared about his mobility. Karen sputtered arguments about visual pollution, but she had no bylaw to reference. The scooter wasn't a permanent structure. Miss Hamilton had greenlit personal modifications to medical devices. Realizing she had no recourse, Karen glowered. She shot a final glare at the bright solar panel before stomping off. News of Karen's shock spread quickly. Many found it hilarious. Her main sabotage method was undone. Some older residents recalled how the crafters overcame sabotage with stronger infrastructure. Now Elliot, in a parallel move, overcame it with a direct technological fix. Karen's attempts to police the communal outlet ended in irrelevance. Freed from her meddling, Elliot zipped around the neighborhood with confidence, recharging in the sun whenever parked. In the days that followed, neighbors smirked seeing Karen watch from her porch as Elliot's scooter glided by. No matter how she disapproved, she couldn't do a thing. The teen had transcended her petty control, forging a new self-sufficiency. Realizing how inspiring Elliot's solar setup was, Ms. Hamilton suggested a small gathering to showcase it, calling it Oakwood's Innovations Day. She invited local teens with similar devices, or e-bikes, to see the concept. She also thought the crafters might enjoy seeing the synergy of neighborly solutions. The board arranged a short demonstration in the clubhouse parking lot, where Elliot rolled up, unfolding his panel. Sam explained the basics. Sun hits the panel, the charge controller manages the battery input, and voila, renewable mobility. A modest crowd formed, parents with curious kids, some seniors from the crafters circle, even a few board members. Ms. Hamilton commended the project as an example of how empathy and innovation can solve issues without confrontation. She singled out Elliot's perseverance in the face of sabotage. People applauded, nodding at the backstory they all knew. How Karen's unplugging acts inadvertently spurred this eco-friendly advancement. Karen did not attend. Or if she did, she stayed hidden, refusing to watch the celebration. The applause, the bright solar panel glinting in midday sun, the sense of unity among neighbors. It all underscored how thoroughly her negativity had been thwarted. Freed from the communal outlet, Elliot was unstoppable. After the demonstration, some asked if they could replicate the idea for other devices or e-bikes. Some offered advice. The session ended with a sense that Oakwood Glen was at the forefront of small-scale green mobility solutions. Elliot, beaming from the attention, felt relief. He was no activist, but he appreciated how the fiasco turned into something positive. Freed from fear of his charger being yanked, he embraced a new sense of mobility and independence. In the subsequent weeks, the board took the e-scooter matter off the official agenda. Ms. Hamilton explained that Elliot's solar solution rendered the original dispute moot. No new bylaw restricted e-scooter charging, though the board might adopt a small policy allowing short medical device charges if needed. Karen, outraged that her crusade ended with no ban, tried to gather signatures among neighbors. She argued that roaming solar vehicles would degrade property values. Hardly anyone signed. The majority saw no harm in a single teen's scooter harnessing sunlight. A local eco-blog caught wind of the story, praising Oakwood Glen for innovative synergy between neighbors. They interviewed Elliot briefly about his experience. He was shy, but politely explained how the sabotage ironically led to a better solution. The blog post circulated among environment-focused circles, garnering supportive comments. Some teased that the unplugging villain did him a favor in the long run. Amid the swirl of positivity, Karen's status in Oakwood Glen declined further. She still posted on the forum about minor infractions, like a neighbor's weeds or a dog barking, but few took her seriously. Ms. Hamilton considered her repeated complaining more of a nuisance than a real threat. Meanwhile, Elliot soared around the neighborhood, no longer dependent on the community's power outlets. Sometimes he'd still charge at home, but for on-the-go top-ups, he just needed the sun. The unstoppable shift was that neighbors embraced Elliot's new autonomy. Freed from Karen's constraints, they realized how stifling her brand of rule enforcement had been. The board recognized there was a difference between legitimate rules for property upkeep and petty constraints that hampered disabled individuals' freedoms. The entire fiasco became a cautionary tale. If you push too hard with aggression, you might spark an even bigger wave of defiance and innovation. Despite everything, Karen clung to illusions of power. She refused to concede that her attempts to ban Elliot from communal outlets had backfired. She posted on Nextdoor about, "No one wants eyesore solar contraptions rolling around." She ranted that the board had no backbone for not banning the scooter's panel attachment. Predictably, the responses hammered her stance. Neighbors ridiculed the idea that a small foldable panel was an eyesore. They pointed out it was probably less intrusive than the cord she loathed. Some brought up the orchard fiasco, an older conflict Karen spearheaded, as an example of her always interfering. Karen retreated from the thread, as the public sentiment was overwhelmingly negative. In a last-ditch attempt, she tried contacting local code enforcement, claiming an unlicensed electric vehicle modification roamed Oakwood Glen. The city official who handled the call politely explained that personal mobility devices were outside typical vehicle regulations and solar attachments didn't violate municipal codes. Karen hung up, enraged that no authority recognized her concerns. Her final move was calling a private attorney about trespassing electricity usage, but the lawyer, once informed of the actual scenario, apparently told her it wasn't worth pursuing. The cost of a lawsuit far outweighed any potential gain, and it wasn't a winnable case. In short, Karen found all her avenues closed. She was forced to watch as Elliot's new freedom soared, a living testament to how the community had thwarted her attempts at dominance. With Karen seemingly out of moves, Oakwood Glen settled into a gentler rhythm. The crafters returned to their pavilion or the clubhouse lawn, unharassed. Elliot roamed on his scooter, solar panels folded behind the seat unless he needed an extra charge in bright sunlight. He found the arrangement so convenient that he sometimes left the panel partially extended while at a friend's house, topping up enough power for errands later. Freed from the fear of sabotage, he relaxed. Miss Hamilton, seeing no continuing drama, removed scooter charging from the next board agenda. The official stance was that disabled residents had a right to minimal accommodations. If others wanted to follow Elliot's solar approach, they were welcome. No new bylaw was needed. The community forum quieted. Residents who used to engage in heated arguments with Karen about petty issues realized she'd lost her main platform, public sympathy. Elliot's parents, though relieved, maintained caution. They encouraged him to remain polite if he ever encountered Karen. He rarely crossed her path, though. She seemed to avoid him, possibly ashamed at how her sabotage attempts had proven fruitless. Meanwhile, the final pieces of normalcy returned. Children played in driveways, dog walkers strolled, and the mild tension that once hovered over the e-scooter matter dissipated. Life in Oakwood Glen was never perfect, but the outcome left many with renewed faith in neighborly compassion. The fiasco had tested their values. Would they abide Karen's quest to exclude a disabled teen from using minimal power, or stand up for fairness? The result was a resounding affirmation of the latter. Ironically, the final solution, solar panels, sidestepped the entire electricity debate, unraveling Karen's premise in one stroke. One bright weekend, a small local radio show invited Elliot and Sam to discuss innovative local green solutions. Elliot, initially shy, practiced explaining how the solar panel attachment worked. Sam joined him at the station. The host introduced them as the teen who overcame sabotage with solar technology, and his neighbor, who spearheaded the design. They recounted the conflict, carefully omitting Karen's real name, calling her an overzealous HOA neighbor. The host chuckled at the story's arc, from petty unplugging sprees to a fully independent, sun-powered scooter. They asked Elliot how it felt to no longer rely on external outlets. Liberating, he said. I never realized how much worry I had about being unplugged unexpectedly. Now, with solar, I ride with confidence. The segment ended with the host praising the invention, urging listeners to consider such solutions for small e-vehicles. Back in Oakwood Glen, folks who heard the broadcast congratulated Elliot. Some teased that he was a local celebrity now. The attention made Karen's sabotage appear even more misguided. If she'd left him alone, none of this spotlight or sense of triumph would have emerged. The entire saga underscored the theme that adversity can spark new growth. Elliot took it in stride, returning to daily life, school projects, hanging with friends, occasionally volunteering with the crafters. Freed from the overshadowing stress, he blossomed socially, confident that no one could forcibly cut him off from mobility again. Meanwhile, Sam continued refining the panel's setup, ensuring durability. The entire neighborhood recognized that Oakwood Glen had inadvertently become a small model for inclusive, eco-friendly living, courtesy of one teen's unstoppable spirit and a contrarian neighbor's attempt at control. At a subsequent HOA meeting, Ms. Hamilton presented Elliot with a small token of appreciation, an engraved plaque reading, "Innovation in Accessibility. Oakwood Glen salutes Elliot Lancaster." The board felt it appropriate to honor him for turning a negative situation into a progressive solution. Applause resonated in the meeting hall as Elliot accepted the plaque, cheeks flushed. Karen sat in the back, arms folded, face unreadable. She said nothing the entire time. Ms. Hamilton also commended Sam for engineering the solar kit. "Your forward-thinking approach has not only helped Elliot, but serves as an example of how neighborhoods can adapt responsibly," she said. Sam nodded, grateful. The board reaffirmed that any future modifications to personal mobility devices that improved accessibility or environmental sustainability were welcome, so long as they followed basic safety guidelines. Karen's expression flickered with indignation, but she refrained from open protest. People suspect she realized how little support she had left. Even her few allies found it indefensible to hamper a disabled teen's mobility. The meeting concluded with broad smiles and an unusual sense of harmony in Oakwood Glen. From that day on, whenever Elliot rode his scooter to the clubhouse or the local park, he'd see neighbors wave. Some would remark on the slick, folded panel at the back. He'd grin, explaining how a short alignment with the sun kept him running. Freed from cords or the risk of sabotage, he traversed Oakwood Glen's winding streets with a fresh sense of autonomy. Over time, Karen's presence in Oakwood Glen diminished. She rarely showed up at board meetings or community events. Neighbors reported seeing her scowl whenever she passed the Crafters Pavilion or glimpsed Elliot's solar-charged scooter. A rumor circulated that she might be looking to sell her home, moving to a different suburban enclave, but it remained unconfirmed. In her frustration, Karen attempted smaller-scale complaints, citing a trivial mismatch in fence color, claiming a neighbor's wind chimes were too loud. The board brushed them aside, labeling them non-issues. Her influence eroded, overshadowed by goodwill from the Crafters' defiance and Elliot's solar victory. Freed from her meddling, Oakwood Glen's atmosphere lightened. People realized that much of the tension in prior years stemmed from Karen's heavy-handed approach to minor rule enforcement. Elliot's parents sometimes felt pity for Karen, suspecting she was lonely, but they couldn't excuse her sabotage. The memory of Elliot stranded with an unplugged battery still stung. They were relieved that her attempts to hamper him had wholly backfired. He remained unstoppable, cherished by neighbors as a symbol of positivity, triumphing over pettiness. As the autumn leaves turned, the community prepared for holiday festivities. The Crafters planned to decorate their pavilion for winter sewing sessions. Elliot planned to add small festive lights powered by an extra solar strip on his scooter, just for fun. Each plan underscored how the sabotage had spurred them to embrace progress, connecting resourcefulness with kindness. Meanwhile, Karen's name faded from daily conversation, a cautionary footnote about how negativity can catalyze the very outcome one sought to prevent. Come late November, Oakwood Glen hosted its annual Thanksgiving potluck in the clubhouse. Elliot's family arrived with homemade pies, while the Crafters brought crocheted table runners and knitted centerpieces. Everyone mingled, sampling turkey, stuffing, pumpkin treats. Ms. Hamilton gave a short speech praising the community's resilience over the past year, hinting at the Crafters' triumph, the newly built pavilion, and Elliot's solar scooter as examples of neighbors uniting against adversity. In a touching moment, Ms. Patterson invited Elliot to the podium. Unaccustomed to public speaking, he shyly thanked everyone who contributed to his solar kit. "I never thought something like a petty unplugging could lead to so much support. Now, instead of being dependent on an outlet, I'm free to roam. I can't thank you all enough." Applause roared, some seniors wiping tears. Karen was spotted lingering near the food table, ignoring the ovation. She nibbled half-heartedly on a cookie, avoiding eye contact. A hush fell as folks realized her presence. Some offered polite nods, but the emotional center of the evening clearly revolved around Elliot's gratitude and the camaraderie that soared around him. Karen soon slipped out, overshadowed, her animosity a stark contrast to the open hearts filling the banquet hall. After the potluck ended, Elliot's parents told him how proud they were of his resilience, praising the neighbors who pitched in. The teen grinned, adding, "I guess Karen's plan backfired in the best way possible." Linda from the crafters overheard and chuckled warmly. Indeed, dear. We all found silver linings in her storm cloud. As winter deepened, Elliot found the mini-split in the crafters' pavilion handy for warming up after chilly rides. Sometimes he'd park his scooter there, solar panel folded. The crafters welcomed him, letting him read or do homework while they crocheted. He occasionally crocheted small squares for charity blankets, learning from them. A sweet intergenerational bond formed. Linda observed how adversity had woven new friendships. We overcame sabotage together, each in our own way. Now, each day is more precious. In spring, Elliot advanced academically, researching renewable energies for a science project. He showcased how small-scale solar solutions can empower personal mobility. The project earned him top marks, partly thanks to real-life demonstration with his scooter. The teacher praised the synergy of technology and community. Karen, though overshadowed, tried once more to spark a complaint about excess cables or attachments. But the board reminded her that the attachments were solar, no external cords used. She retreated, thoroughly outmaneuvered. Her original justification that he was stealing HOA electricity no longer applied. The fiasco had ended, leaving her with no further recourse. In these calmer days, neighbors reflected on the saga's moral. Attempts to suppress or sabotage a vulnerable individual's resource often lead to a more permanent, robust solution. The crafters saw it with their pavilion. Elliot experienced it with solar energy. Meanwhile, Karen's negativity ironically spurred progress. Freed from outlet dependence, Elliot soared around the neighborhood like never before, each ray of sunshine fueling his independence. Life carried on quietly, the overshadowing tension replaced by a renewed sense of communal pride. Time drifted on in Oakwood Glen. The meltdown over e-scooter charging faded into local lore. How Karen tried to stop a disabled teen from using minimal electricity, only to push him toward an even better solar-based solution. New residents heard the story, half in disbelief, until they saw Elliot's scooter with its folded panel glinting in the sun. They admired how the community stood behind him, forging a modern fix that parted ways with petty constraints. Karen remained an isolated figure, seldom leaving her house except for errands. Some whispered she might soon move. Others surmised she'd never fully relent. But it hardly mattered. The board had discovered more flexible ways to manage small issues without suffocating neighbors' freedoms. Ms. Hamilton championed the notion that compassion must guide interpretation of rules, ensuring no future teen would face sabotage for charging a medical or mobility device. As for Elliot, each sunny day reaffirmed his sense of freedom. He'd unfold the solar panels whenever he took a break, letting them soak up rays. No need to watch for secret unplugging. Freed from that fear, he found new confidence. He participated more actively in school clubs, visited friends further away. The scooter's range no longer hinged on a single outlet. Day by day, he advanced in skill and social life, forging a bright path forward. Neighbors who once tiptoed around strict bylaw enforcers recognized how adversity can unify them. Through the Crafters Pavilion and Elliot's solar scooter, Oakwood Glen discovered that, ironically, sabotage can catalyze a stronger sense of togetherness. If one meddling Karen tried to hamper the vulnerable, the community responded with unstoppable empathy and innovation. And so, under the warm glow of the suburban sun, Elliot rode on, unplugged from the pettiness of sabotage, forever powered by the unstoppable brilliance of neighborly goodwill.